Daniel Carter rubbed the sleep from his eyes as he stepped into the cabin of the late-night flight. The week had been merciless, a blur of client meetings, deadlines, and endless hours staring at numbers that refused to add up. He was a banker by profession, but at his core, he was a father. Every overtime shift, every weary commute, every sleepless night, all of it was for one reason only: his son, Musa, 9 years old. With boundless energy and a love for games that could brighten even Daniel's darkest days, Musa was his anchor in a world that too often felt adrift. As he slid into his window seat, Daniel allowed himself a small smile at the thought of his son waiting for him at home. Tonight's flight was routine, just another necessary step in his endless balancing act between career and fatherhood. The boarding announcements droned on as passengers shuffled past, stowing bags in overhead compartments. Daniel welcomed the quiet of the empty seat beside him. For once, perhaps he could stretch out, close his eyes, and allow the hum of the engines to lull him into a few hours of peace. But just as the final passengers hurried down the aisle, a woman slipped into the seat beside him. She was in her late 30s, with an air of quiet composure, dressed plainly but neatly. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed, as though she had long ago learned how to navigate the world without drawing too much attention. Daniel offered a polite nod, the universal language of strangers sharing two close spaces. She acknowledged him with a small, tight smile before fastening her seatbelt. Then, as the plane prepared for takeoff, Daniel noticed a delicate silver locket resting against the woman's collarbone. At first, it was nothing unusual, a trinket, a piece of jewelry worn for sentimental value. But when she unconsciously opened the locket and brushed her thumb across the small photo inside, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was Musa. His son's face stared back at him from the tiny frame, smiling that familiar, mischievous smile that Daniel knew better than anyone else in the world. His heart stuttered, his pulse thundering in his ears. He blinked, half convinced fatigue was playing tricks on him. But no, there was no mistaking it. The curve of his son's grin, the dimple on his left cheek, the brightness in his eyes. It was Musa. Daniel turned toward the woman, his voice tight, almost unsteady. "Excuse me, where did you get that locket?" The woman's fingers froze on the silver chain. Slowly, she closed the locket and let it fall back against her chest, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. There was something in her gaze, a flicker of recognition, of hesitation that made Daniel's skin prickle with unease. She asked softly, her tone measured, "It's a reminder of someone important." Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. "That boy in your locket," he pressed, his voice lower now, steadier, but charged with urgency. "That's my son." Daniel's voice trembled, though he fought to keep it steady. "That boy, that's my son Musa. Why do you have his picture?" The woman's fingers tightened around the locket as though she were suddenly aware it had betrayed her. She turned her face slightly toward the cabin window, the reflection of the overhead lights outlining her profile. For a long, suffocating moment, she said nothing. Finally, she drew in a slow breath. "I wondered if this might happen," she whispered, her voice calm but laced with something fragile. Daniel's chest tightened. His instincts screamed at him. This was wrong, dangerous even. Who was this woman? Why did she have his son's photograph? He leaned in, his words sharpened by fear. Who are you? Tell me right now, before I call the flight attendant. Her eyes met his then, and to Daniel's surprise, they weren't hostile. They carried a weight he couldn't decipher: sorrow, regret, and something like resolve. My name is Evelyn, she said quietly, and before your wife passed, I knew her. The mention of his wife's name was like a blade to the chest. For years, Daniel had carried the grief quietly, doing everything he could to shield Musa from the heaviness of loss. His wife had been the love of his life, the anchor of their small family, and losing her had left a wound that never fully healed. His brows knit in disbelief. You knew her. That's impossible. She never mentioned you. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, as though she expected his doubt. No, she wouldn't have. The things we went through together, she kept them from you. Not because she didn't love you, Daniel, but because she wanted to protect you and your son. Daniel shook his head, the ground beneath him shifting. His heart thudded against his ribs. Protect us. From what? The woman hesitated, then touched the locket again. Her thumb lingered on the metal surface before she spoke, her voice lower now, more intimate, as if confessing a sacred truth. I carry Musa's photo because your wife asked me to. She made me promise that if the time ever came, I would find you, that I would tell you the truth about her past. Daniel's breath caught. His rational mind screamed nonsense, yet his gut told him she wasn't lying. The way she spoke his wife's memory, with reverence and achit, wasn't the voice of a con artist. It was the voice of someone haunted. Still, his fear dug in deeper. He leaned closer, his tone rough with restrained anger. You need to explain, Evelyn, right now. Why would a stranger carry my son's picture? Why would my wife ever involve you in something like this? What are you not telling me? Evelyn's eyes glistened, though her voice remained steady. Because, Daniel, there are things about your wife's life you never knew. And tonight, sitting here, you're going to learn them. The airplane cabin was hushed, the low drone of the engines filling the silence between Daniel and the woman beside him. He sat rigid, fists clenched on his knees, his whole being demanding answers. Evelyn seemed to measure every word before speaking, as though the truth itself carried weight too heavy to release all at once. Finally, she began. Your wife and I met overseas long before you ever knew her. We were both volunteers with a humanitarian relief mission in Caramel Province. It was a place torn apart by drought and conflict, a place where children starved and villages burned while the world looked away. Your wife. She was fearless there. Daniel's breath caught. His late wife had always been compassionate, yes, but she had rarely spoken of her past in detail. He had known she spent a year abroad before they met, but the way Evelyn spoke gave it an entirely new dimension. Evelyn's eyes softened with memory. She was the kind of person who would give away her last sip of water to a child, even when she hadn't had any herself. I remember one night how our convoy was ambushed. We were trapped in a small outpost, terrified. But she never panicked. She comforted everyone else, even me. She sang to the children to keep them from crying while bullets rattled outside. That's who she was. Brave in ways most people never get to see. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. His wife had been many things: loving, gentle, resilient. But this version of her, strong and unflinching in the face of danger, was a part of her life he had never glimpsed. Evelyn's voice grew quieter, shaded with grief. She carried scars from that time, Daniel. Not the kind you see on the body, but here. She pressed a hand lightly against her chest. The things she witnessed, the things she endured, they never truly left her. She once told me that when she came home, she wanted to leave it all behind, to build a new life, with love at its center. That's where you came in. You gave her that. Daniel stared at the seat in front of him, trying to steady the storm. Inside, his wife had been a mystery at times. A person with moments of distant silence he had never fully understood. He had always assumed it was simply grief or exhaustion. Now he wondered if those silences were the echoes of a past she had tried to keep hidden from him. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. Why didn't she tell me any of this? Why keep it from me? Evelyn looked at him with eyes that shimmered in the dim cabin light. Because she wanted to protect you from it. She wanted Musa to grow up in light, not in shadows. She carried the burden so you wouldn't have to. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Every word Evelyn spoke painted his wife as both more extraordinary and more unknowable than he had ever realized. Love and sorrow tangled in him, leaving him unmoored. For the first time in years, he realized there had been whole chapters of his wife's life he had never read. And yet, sitting beside this stranger who had shared those hidden chapters, he felt closer to her than he had in a long time. The cabin lights dimmed to their nighttime glow, casting passengers in muted shades of blue. Daniel sat stiffly, Evelyn's words echoing in his mind like thunder that would not fade. Humanitarian missions, convoys under fire, children clinging to her as she sang through gunfire. His wife, his gentle, radiant wife, had lived a life of shadows and sacrifice before he ever knew her. And she had never breathed a word of it. Just then, the plane jolted violently. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and a ripple of gasps rose through the cabin as turbulence rattled the fuselage. Daniel gripped the armrest hard, his knuckles white. The sudden motion wrenching him from his spiraling thoughts. But as the plane shuddered and dipped, the storm in the skies felt no different than the one brewing inside him. His voice cracked as he turned to Evelyn. Did I even know her? Or was our whole life together just a story she built to escape what she'd been through? Evelyn didn't flinch at the question. Instead, she studied him with a gaze that was both steady and unbearably kind. You knew her, Daniel, the truest parts of her. She chose you, chose your son, chose the life she wanted, but the pain she carried, she didn't want that to touch either of you. It was her way of loving you. Daniel shook his head, staring down at his trembling hands. And Musa, what am I supposed to tell him? How do I explain a mother he barely remembers had a life full of secrets? The turbulence intensified, trays rattling and overhead bins creaking. A child 2 rows behind whimpered, and for a moment, Daniel thought of Musa small, vulnerable, waiting for him at home, his innocence untouched by any of this. The thought was like a knife. Evelyn reached for the locket again, her thumb brushing over Musa's picture. When she spoke, her voice was softer, almost reverent. I've been searching for you for years, not to harm you, not to confuse you, but to honor her. Before she passed, your wife made me promise. She said, if I cannot tell them, one day you must. That's why I carry Musa's photo, not to claim him, to remind myself of the promise I swore I would keep. The plane steadied, though the weight in Daniel's chest did not. He stared at her, struggling to reconcile the grief in his heart with the strange sense of truth in her eyes. For the first time, he saw not an intruder, but a keeper of something. Sacred fragments of a past his wife had buried, and perhaps a final gift meant for him and his son. The cabin had quieted again. Passengers lulled into uneasy calm after the turbulence. But Daniel's heart still pounded as though the storm raged on inside him. He fixed his gaze on Evelyn, his voice rough. "You keep talking about promises, about protecting us, but all I have are your words. Why should I believe any of this?" Evelyn held his stare for a moment, then lifted the delicate chain from her neck. The small locket, scratched and worn with time, caught the faint glow of the cabin lights. She opened it carefully, as though unveiling something fragile and sacred. "You've only seen this side," she whispered, showing him the tiny photograph of Musa, smiling, no older than 3. She turned the locket over, pressing a nearly invisible catch at its base. With a soft click, a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed slightly with age. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "I never read it," Evelyn said quietly. "It wasn't mine to read. She gave it to me before she left for her final mission. She said, when the time comes, he'll need this. You'll know when, and tonight. I think that time has come." With trembling hands, Daniel took the tiny folded note. His heart thudded as he unfolded it, the paper fragile between his fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. His wife's loops and curves, tender and familiar, as though no time had passed. His eyes blurred as he read, "My love, if you are holding this, it means my voice is gone, but not my heart. There are parts of me I never shared because I wanted your world, our son's world, to be free from the weight I carried. But know this: you gave me peace. You gave me the life I dreamed of when the world was breaking. If you doubt who I was, look at Musa. He is the truest part of me. Raise him with courage, and he will carry both of us within him. And remember, every moment with you was my home." Daniel pressed the paper to his lips, his shoulders shaking. The ache in his chest swelled into something raw and uncontainable. All the years of unanswered questions, all the silent grief. Suddenly, he had her words again. A gift he never thought possible. Evelyn's eyes glistened as she watched him, her voice no more than a whisper. "She wanted you to have her truth, Daniel. Not the darkness of it, but the love. That's why I came." Daniel couldn't speak. He sat in silence, clutching the note as though it were her hand. As though in that single fragile page his wife had returned to him, if only for a moment. The hum of the engines softened as the plane began its descent, a gentle vibration under Daniel's hands. He sat back, still clutching the small note, letting the words sink into him. Grief still lingered, sharp and raw, but it was tempered now by love, understanding, and a strange relief. For the first time in years, he felt a thread of peace connecting him to the wife he had lost, a thread strengthened by the truth she had left behind. Daniel looked at Evelyn, her face serene in the dim cabin light. He spoke softly, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for keeping her promise, for bringing me this. I don't know what I would have done without it." Evelyn gave him a small, gentle smile. It was my honor. She trusted me, and I intended to honor that trust. Musa is lucky to have you. And now, you know the parts of her she wanted you to know. Daniel nodded, a lump in his throat. He realized in that moment that Evelyn was no longer just a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. She was now a permanent part of their story, a guardian of the love and memory of his wife. There lives, for that fleeting moment on a plane in the quiet of the night, had intertwined in a way that would never be undone. As the plane touched down, the tires screeching softly against the tarmac, Daniel felt the world shift beneath him, not in loss, but in a profound sense of continuity. He would see Musa, he would hold him, and he would share with him the love and sacrifices of the mother he never fully knew. Yet, Daniel understood that this was only the beginning. The journey of truly understanding his wife's life, of embracing all the facets of her courage, her sacrifices, and her love, was just starting. He looked out the window, at the lights of the city sprawling beneath him, and a quiet determination settled in his heart. This flight had begun as a routine journey home, but it had become a passage into the heart of truth, love, and memory. Daniel knew that while the pain of loss would never vanish, the gift of understanding would guide him and Musa forward, stronger than ever. He inhaled deeply, folding the note carefully, and whispered a quiet promise to himself and to the memory of his wife. I will honor you always, and I will make sure Musa knows the love you left behind. With that, he stood, ready to step off the plane and back into the world, carrying not just the grief of what was lost, but the warmth and strength of what had endured.